Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to Pause with Prudence. I'm glad you're here. This is a space for those rethinking faith, untangling beliefs, or simply longing for a quiet, honest place to belong. As we usually do, let's begin by pausing together. Take a deep breath, and as you breathe in, fill both your chest and diaphragm cavity, and then let it out slowly. Today we are pausing with one of the most painful, persistent, and hard questions of faith. Why do bad things happen to good people? This is not a theoretical question. It usually comes in the middle of loss or illness or injustice or grief. Usually when something terrible happens, we look for someone to blame. And many people instinctively ask, why did God do this? Or why did God let this happen? But I want to say this first, as gently and clearly as I can. I do not believe that God causes bad things to happen to anyone. And I don't say that to protect God's reputation. I say it because blaming God for suffering often deepens wounds instead of healing them. I actually say that God didn't cause it to happen because I actually believe that is true. You see, the universe was created with laws. And because I believe God created the world, at creation, God put certain things into motion, what we might call the laws of nature. These are physical laws, biological laws, emotional and relational laws. You and I break some of these laws every day. Of course, some have more harmful outcomes than others. For instance, if you jump off a tall building, gravity will most likely cause you harm. That harm is not God punishing you. It's not God choosing suffering for you. It's a consequence of how the universe works. In the same way, bodies get sick, weather turns violent, systems fail, and people make harmful choices. Much of what causes suffering is not divine intent, but the cost of living in a real, free, and vulnerable world, a place of choice. Love actually could not exist without freedom and choice, and freedom always carries risks. A world without choice and the possibility of harm would also be a world without real love and courage and growth and compassion. If God had not allowed choice, we would all be robots. Human beings are free to choose kindness over cruelty, justice over injustice, care over neglect. God does not cause those choices, and God does not approve of the harm they cause. But God allows freedom, because without it, relationship with God and others would be impossible. But here's the hard question we really cannot avoid. Why didn't God prevent it? Why does He allow it to happen? If God is all-powerful, why doesn't God stop bad things from happening? That's no small question, and any answer that rushes past it most likely protects the idea more than it tends to the wound. Maybe the issue is not God's power, but how we understand power. If you're like me, I often imagine power as control. It seems that if you have power, you should have the ability to override, interrupt, or prevent something. While that to some degree may be true, the fact is, love that controls is not love. It's coercion. To prevent all suffering, God would have to suspend the laws of nature, which would override human freedom. God would have to undo cause and effect and remove risk and vulnerability. In other words, God would have to uncreate the world, and we would no longer be living in a real world, but a managed world. Creation is beautiful, but it's dangerous. It's free, but it's fragile. And God does not abandon creation because it's risky. God sees, and God comes. And if you want to know what God is like in a suffering world, we have to look at Jesus. And what we see is striking. Jesus does not prevent all suffering. He does not dismantle violent systems. He does not override human cruelty. Instead, he enters fully into it, into human vulnerability. He heals some, yes, but he does not heal all. He weeps, he suffers, he was betrayed, and he dies an unjust death. And this tells us something profound. God's answer to suffering is not to control it. It is to be present with it, not to prevent it, but to be a companion to it. God does not impose help or healing or comfort on us in the way we always want. There is not always a rescue. But while love never forces itself on us, it's always there if we have eyes to see. And we can see help when we open ourselves to God, when we invite presence, when we allow comfort, when we accept strength for the next step. God does not cause pain, but God is present within it and around it. It does not protect us from suffering, but allows solidarity with it. So perhaps the question is not, why did God let this happen? But instead, where is God in it? And before I attempt to answer that, let's pause right now. And I want to gently ask you to ask yourself, where have I blamed God for something that was not God's doing? How has blaming God affected my trust in God and my relationship with others? No pressure to answer. I just want you to notice. Often the answer is found not in explanations, but in presence. Presence means someone who stays, someone who listens, allowing our breath to return and courage to arise within that surprises us. I believe this is where God is found. Understanding God's presence is not easy to explain. Yes, God can be found everywhere and in all things. But let me say that does not mean that God is everything and has caused everything. For instance, God is not a tree, but the presence and character of God can be found in that tree. God is the originator of that tree, so the likeness of God is there. That is one way to describe presence. Another way to describe the presence of God is the way humans might describe it. Teresa of Avila described it as an interior companionship, a deepening stillness within, and a union so deep that transcends feelings. Master Eckhart said it was the isness beneath all things, and the presence that sustains every breath. The mystics seemed to agree that it was an interior presence rather than exterior, transforming rather than merely comforting, an experience more through love than intellect. Richard Rohr says it is less about getting God and more about awakening to what already holds everything together. Henry Nouwen says it's the voice that calls you beloved and the quiet assurance beneath the shame. When God made humans, the likeness of God was put within them. Each human, since the beginning of time, has had a choice to live in that likeness or not. When Jesus came, he gave us a glimpse of God's presence and showed us how God acts. He said that as we follow him, we could experience God's presence in different ways. Experience a God who is always with us no matter what we go through. Not a God that brings bad things to us, but promises presence no matter what happens. I personally am so grateful for God's presence in my life every day, every moment. Bad things have happened to me, but God's presence has been with me through it all. So when things happen to me that do not seem good, I have learned to say, God, What do you want me to see from this? And where are you in this? And when I've noticed and acknowledged God's presence in those things, it makes me a better person, not a bitter person. The scripture has a verse that says, and I will paraphrase it, "When you have troubles, count them as friends, knowing that when the work within you is done, you will be made more complete." That's amazing. But that is about seeing God in all things, because God is there. And through Jesus, we know that God understands our pain. And as I said last time, through death and pain, we can find new life and the presence of God. As I close, I want you to think about these questions this week. What if God is not absent, but deeper than your current awareness? What if silence that you may be experiencing is not emptiness, but an invitation to God's presence? What if the presence of God is less about sensation and more about true relationship and companionship? Maybe it's time for you to release yourself from the burden of blaming God for what God never caused. I hope this week you can find a God who has not left you alone, but the God who wants to accompany you and be present with you. So again, take a deep breath, my dear friend, and find rest and comfort for your soul. Thank you for pausing with me today. If you have a question you'd like me to respond to, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at prudence@pausewithprudence.com. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I'll gladly share what I'm learning along the way. And if you'd like to go deeper and want reminders of today's episode, you can download the pause page for this episode at www.pausewithprudence.com. Until next time, blessings and peace to you.